My name is Captain Lauren Hayes. I'm 28 and for most of my life, I carried the weight of being seen as the lesser soldier in my family. My older sister, Commander Rachel Hayes, seemed to earn medals just by breathing, while I felt like every achievement of mine was dismissed as average, unworthy of real praise. For years I accepted the role of the one who didn't measure up, the daughter who was always a step behind. But no soldier can take constant fire forever. There comes a moment when the barrage of words finally breaks through your armor. For me, that moment arrived on a quiet Tuesday evening when my mother, a decorated colonel, delivered the harshest comparison yet. Before I take you through the mission that nearly broke me, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories of loyalty, betrayal, and strength. Believe me, you'll want to hear how one conversation reshaped my entire life. I grew up on a military base in Virginia, where the air always smelled like jet fuel and pride. From the very beginning, I lived in Rachel's shadow. She was 2 years older and already excelling in every way a Hayes was expected to: flawless fitness scores, top marks in strategy courses, and early leadership roles in cadet programs. By comparison, my efforts always seemed to fall short. If I passed weapons qualification with a solid score, Mom reminded me that Rachel had set records on the same range. If I was recognized for teamwork, Mom pointed out that Rachel was leading entire units by that age. The comparisons started small. During training reviews, I'd stand at attention outside the office while Mom discussed my decent but unremarkable evaluations, always with Rachel's name used as the gold standard. Lauren is disciplined, instructors would say, but she doesn't have Rachel's natural command presence. Mom would nod in agreement and later tell me in the car, "You need to sharpen your edge just like your sister." Rachel finished her academy years with a spotless record: 4.0 evaluations, multiple leadership awards, captain of the marksmanship team, and volunteer hours stacked on top of her service. Meanwhile, I scraped by with passing scores in tactics and poured myself into engineering projects nobody in my family seemed to value. I built drones, worked with schematics, and found purpose in tech innovation. But when I showed Mom the prototypes I was proud of, she barely glanced up before announcing, "That's fine, Lauren. Did you hear Rachel just got another commendation for leadership?" Those recognition ceremonies became a ritual humiliation. Rachel secured assignments at elite posts and full recommendations for specialized training schools, while I was told community-level deployments were a good fit for someone like me. At family dinners, uncles raised toasts to Rachel's accomplishments, while I sat quietly, invisible except for the occasional polite question about what unit I'd been assigned to this time. Even the photos in our quarters told the story. Rachel's commendation plaques, dress uniform portraits, and news articles about her were displayed proudly in the living room. My photos, smaller, framed cheaply, were tucked in corners, often overshadowed by Rachel's latest medal. Anyone who walked in could see the hierarchy immediately. When Rachel was deployed overseas, I thought I'd finally get a break from the endless comparisons. But Mom made sure her presence lingered. She'd put Rachel's letters and video calls on speaker so I could hear every detail: her commanding officer's praise, her new leadership roles, her chance to train with top brass. And every time I was expected to listen, smile, and admire. As I moved into adulthood, nothing changed, only the stage did. Rachel kept climbing the ranks quickly, while I fought tooth and nail for recognition. I specialized in engineering and tech design, eventually earning a spot with a defense contractor on base. I was proud of the work, designing systems that protected lives, but Mom always dismissed it as my little side job. When neighbors asked about her daughters, she'd beam about Rachel's service record and her rising influence in command, then casually add, "Lauren works with gadgets." The sting of that dismissal cut every time. Meanwhile, Rachel's reputation soared. She was placed on leadership fast tracks, appearing in base newsletters and earning respect from senior officers. Mom kept every article, building a scrapbook of Rachel's triumphs. My own promotions, hard-earned though modest, were barely acknowledged. When I advanced to lead engineer on a classified project, Mom only said, "That's good, dear. Did you hear Rachel was just tapped for a NATO joint exercise?" Even my personal life wasn't immune. Rachel's partner, a respected military surgeon, was everything Mom admired: prestige, rank, and a spotless image. Their relationship was featured in military newsletters and highlighted at base galas. By contrast, my relationships, with fellow engineers, teachers, and small business owners, were dismissed as unserious or unstable. When I dated an Air Force pilot who ran his own training program, Mom constantly questioned his career security. "He's nice, Lauren, but Rachel's partner is building a legacy. You should think more strategically." Her words ate away at me, and eventually I let them sabotage what could have been a good relationship. Looking back, I see just how much her disapproval influenced me. Every choice I made was weighed against Rachel's flawless image. And every family gathering felt like another debriefing where I was reminded of my rank. Not in the military but in my mother's eyes. Always second. Always lesser. The tipping point came at Rachel's 30th birthday gala. A grand event Mom orchestrated down to the last salute. When Commander Rachel Hayes announced her engagement, the entire base felt it. At least that's how Mom, the colonel, made it seem. Rachel showed off a diamond so large and clear it looked like it had been cut from a star itself. And Mom actually cried in front of everyone, her shoulders trembling like she'd just received a battlefield medal. Within minutes she was talking about it as though it were a campaign that needed immediate strategy, what she proudly called the wedding of the century. 4 weeks, every family conversation became a tactical briefing on floral arrangements, seating charts, and guest lists. Mom pored over venue brochures the way she used to review field maps, underlining details and making notes in the margins like she was preparing for a mission. Rachel's fiancé, Dr. Andrew Carter, had proposed during their trip to Europe. Paris, of course. The story of that carriage ride through cobbled streets, the Michelin star restaurant, the champagne under the Eiffel Tower. It was told and retold so often, I could practically recite it myself like the national anthem. Each time Mom added more vivid details. The ring's flawless cut, the exclusivity of the restaurant, the perfection of the moment. To her, it was a fairy tale executed with the same precision she admired in Rachel's military career. Meanwhile, I was trying to build something very different. My name is Captain Lauren Hayes, and while my sister's life was being celebrated like a decorated campaign, mine felt like a constant battle in the mud. I had left active duty and was slowly establishing myself in military engineering contracts. Freelance design work for defense firms, drone schematics for training programs, and tech integration for small units. My long-term goal was independence, to grow my own operation where I could dictate the projects I took on, rather than follow orders that undervalued my skills. But that path required brutal hours, enormous personal sacrifice, and the kind of uncertainty that made Mom roll her eyes. "Rachel has stability," she would mutter whenever she caught me still awake at my drafting table past midnight. "She knows where her paychecks are coming from. This side business of yours is shaky at best. Lauren, maybe you should focus on climbing the ranks in a traditional way instead of chasing these projects." Her tone stung more than enemy fire. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was elbows deep in a redesign of a surveillance prototype when Mom's voice cracked through the line. Even with her usual discipline, I could hear panic. My father, retired Major Hayes, had collapsed at his civilian post as a high school principal. He'd been rushed to the hospital with what doctors feared was a massive heart attack. I abandoned my work immediately and drove across town, barely remembering the streets as I sped toward the emergency room. For 8 long hours, Mom and I sat in stiff plastic chairs, the sounds of heart monitors and rushed footsteps echoing around us. When the surgeon finally came out, his words were a mixture of relief and warning. The operation had been successful, but Dad's recovery would take months of rehabilitation. He wouldn't be able to return to work for at least half a year, maybe longer. That's when I learned the truth about our family's finances. Mom revealed, in a voice so low it almost sounded like a confession, that they had been living paycheck to paycheck for years. Their savings had been bled dry by medical bills and constant home repairs. Dad's salary as principal had been the lifeline, with Mom's part-time library job hardly enough to cover extras. Now, without his income, they were staring down the possibility of losing the house. Her hands shook as she scribbled numbers into a notebook, whispering about overdue utilities and an upcoming mortgage payment she couldn't cover. "Your father's pride would be shattered if he knew how bad it is," she admitted. For the first time I saw my mother, my iron-willed colonel, reduced to fear. I didn't hesitate. "I'll handle it," I said firmly, the way I'd say "Roger that" to a command. My freelance work was steady enough, and although I wasn't wealthy, I had enough savings to cover the mortgage for a while. I even insisted she not bother Rachel. She's buried in wedding prep in her firm, I told her. I've got this. Mom looked both relieved and conflicted. Are you sure you can afford it, Lauren? Your projects aren't exactly booming. Her doubt pierced me, but I swallowed the pain and assured her that keeping the family steady came before anything else. What followed were some of the hardest months of my life. I worked 12-hour days, burning through every ounce of energy to cover both my own bills and theirs. I took contracts no one else wanted, building training interfaces for underfunded units, designing basic websites for struggling veteran-owned businesses, even creating marketing flyers for local nonprofits. Weekends vanished. Sleep became a luxury. I was running operations from my cramped apartment, often falling asleep at my desk with technical drawings smeared beneath my cheek. The bitter irony was impossible to ignore. While Rachel was meeting with florists and booking extravagant venues, I was the one preventing our parents from losing their home. And Mom, despite watching me drain my savings and health for their survival, never once mentioned my contribution to anyone. She updated Rachel about Dad's recovery regularly, yet somehow left out the part where her lesser daughter was keeping the family afloat. Under that relentless pressure, my business started to grow. Word spread, referrals multiplied, and clients returned for more. Slowly, I was building the reputation I had dreamed of. But Mom couldn't see it. To her, my work was still Lauren's little side projects, risky and unstable compared to Rachel's secure, prestigious path. The financial toll mounted. By the third month of Dad's rehabilitation, I had poured over $15,000 into supporting them. Most of my emergency fund was gone. Yet at every family dinner I still heard only one refrain: praise for Rachel. When I showed up exhausted from late nights, Mom would shake her head and say, "You need to manage your time better. Rachel always balances her career and family." When I missed a gathering to meet a client deadline, she scolded me, pointing out that Rachel never let work interfere with family commitments. The breaking point came at Rachel's engagement party, a spectacle Mom orchestrated as though she were hosting a state dinner. Despite our dire financial situation, she hired caterers, rented luxury linens, and transformed the backyard into what she proudly called a worthy stage for Rachel's triumph. I had spent that morning hauling tables, arranging flowers, and checking seating assignments while Mom barked orders like a commanding officer on parade. "Make sure Rachel's place cards are aligned perfectly," she insisted. "This has to be flawless." I bit my tongue, forcing myself to smile even as resentment simmered. I was helping fund the celebration of a sister who hadn't lifted a finger during our family's crisis. When Rachel finally arrived, radiant in her designer dress, with her fiancé at her side in his tailored suit, the guests erupted in applause. Glasses clinked, compliments flowed, and relative after relative toasted to Rachel's brilliance. Her career, her engagement, her seemingly perfect life. I stood near the back, clapping politely, my presence unnoticed. Then came the moment that shattered what little patience I had left. Mrs. Coleman, our longtime neighbor, asked Mom casually about how both her daughters were doing. Mom beamed, gesturing to Rachel and Andrew. "Rachel is thriving," she declared. "She's on the partner track at her firm, engaged to a wonderful man and planning the wedding of the year." Then she paused, her voice dropping an octave as she waved vaguely toward me. "And Lauren, well, she's still figuring things out with her little projects." The words landed harder than a mortar round. I had been draining myself to keep this family from collapsing, sacrificing every ounce of my own security, and in front of our community, Mom reduced me to a hobbyist tinkering with gadgets. Neighbors nodded politely, their eyes full of pity, and I felt the humiliation burn like acid in my chest. Later that evening, as I packed up tables and boxed leftovers, Mom continued her stream of Rachel-centered praise. "Wasn't she stunning tonight? Andrew's family was so impressed. This is exactly what she deserves after all her years of hard work." Each word was a blade twisting deeper. The woman I had carried on my shoulders for months couldn't even acknowledge that I had made the evening possible. And in that moment, as I silently folded linens with blistered hands, I realized something inside me was breaking. Every moment of that engagement celebration was dissected and praised, as if it had been a flawlessly executed military exercise. Rachel's toast was lauded as inspirational, her delivery precise, her words worthy of a leader destined for command. Andrew's polished charm was recounted by relatives like they were briefing after a successful diplomatic mission. But in all of Mom's running commentary, her endless admiration and gleeful analysis. Not once did she even hint at the truth, that without me the entire event wouldn't have been possible. That the unsuccessful daughter had been the one quietly footing the bills and holding the household together. The fatigue pressing on me by then wasn't just in my body, it had seeped into every layer of my mind and spirit. I had been grinding myself down with non-stop assignments, running both my contracted engineering projects and extra freelance work to cover the costs of keeping our parents' home above water. Yet, in the eyes of the people I was sacrificing for, I remained nothing more than the family disappointment. Nights blurred into one another with little sleep, my nerves shot from the stress of balancing impossible budgets and deadlines. My health, relationships, even the possibility of a future beyond this cycle. Everything was being quietly eroded. I didn't realize it then, but my breaking point was approaching with the same inevitability as a storm on the horizon. The combination of financial strain, constant dismissal, and decades of being compared unfavorably to my sister was about to ignite a confrontation that would change our family forever. The version of me who had spent years seeking approval, who still longed for a nod of pride from my mother, was finally reaching her limit. 2 weeks after the engagement party, we gathered again at Mom's quarters for Sunday dinner. It was a tradition she had clung to even while Dad recovered from his heart attack, as though keeping up the ritual could preserve some semblance of order. Rachel arrived late but radiant as always, announcing her newest achievement before she'd even set her bag down. She had just been promoted to senior associate, the youngest at her firm's history, with a salary bump and a new office overlooking the city. The news lit Mom up like a flare. She clapped her hands together, practically sprinting to the living room to call Dad in so he could hear the glorious update. "Harold, did you hear that? Rachel made senior associate at her age, the youngest they've ever had." Her pride filled every corner of the room. She peppered Rachel with rapid-fire questions. The size of the pay increase, the clients she'd be managing, what this meant for her future as a partner. Dinner turned into an impromptu banquet in Rachel's honor. Mom set out her finest china, the silverware polished like she was preparing for a state visit. She moved around the kitchen humming, her face glowing with joy. At one point she put her hand on Rachel's shoulder and said, "This is exactly what I always dreamed of when you were little. Watching you excel at everything you touched, I knew you were destined for greatness." I sat at the same table listening. When there was a pause in conversation, I mentioned almost cautiously my own news. I had just secured the biggest contract of my career. A regional defense supplier had signed me for a comprehensive rebranding of their training program. A 6-month project that promised stability and the chance to expand my reputation in the commercial military tech sector. It was the kind of breakthrough I had been clawing toward for years. Mom's response was a distracted, almost dismissive hum. "That's nice, dear," she said, not even looking up from the salad she was tossing. "How much does it pay?" I gave her the figure, but she barely registered it before pivoting back to peppering Rachel with more questions about her promotion. My milestone had been reduced to background noise, a footnote in the evening that had become another coronation for my sister. Rachel then, with casual ease, mentioned her upcoming travel plans with Andrew, a 2-week European tour. First-class flights. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. Luxury hotels. Private wine tastings. It was the kind of trip that would cost more than I made in half a year, yet she described it as nothing more than a well-earned treat for all our hard work. Mom listened with open longing, sighing wistfully. "I can't even remember the last time your father and I took a proper vacation. We've been talking about visiting your Aunt Ruth in Florida for years, but we never seemed to have the money." The irony was almost unbearable. The money that could have taken my parents on that simple trip, the modest dream they had quietly deferred, had been spent instead on hospital bills and mortgage payments I was covering. My funds had gone toward keeping them afloat, not luxury travel or prestige dinners. And still my sacrifices were invisible. Rachel's glamorous vacations earned admiration, while my practical, back-breaking support was ignored. As dinner went on, Mom's focus stayed locked on Rachel's world. Her firm's feature in a legal magazine, Andrew's upcoming speech at a Chicago medical conference, the engagement photo that had been published in the regional paper. Every update was analyzed like a tactical briefing. My own progress, my growing business, my tireless work remained unacknowledged. When the conversation finally did turn toward me, it was only to criticize. Mom's eyes scanned me up and down. My casual clothing was compared unfavorably to Rachel's sleek, professional attire. My single status was highlighted as yet another flaw, set against Rachel's stable, admirable engagement. My career path, unconventional and built on risk, was questioned outright. "You know, Lauren," Mom said as she set dessert on the table, her tone cutting in its condescension, "Rachel's success didn't happen by chance. She made smart choices. She focused on stability. She built a proper foundation. Maybe it's time you considered following her example instead of chasing these risky ventures of yours." Each word sliced deeper, another reminder that in her eyes, I was still inadequate. What made it worse was the cruel irony. The financial strain she scolded me for was a direct result of my support. The long hours, the dwindling savings, the anxiety that followed me to bed every night. It was all tied to the sacrifices I'd made for her and Dad. Yet she saw only failure where there had been generosity. By then my reserves were nearly gone. Months of financial pressure, coupled with her relentless criticism, had turned me into a live grenade waiting for a trigger. And that trigger came 3 days later. It was a Wednesday evening. I stopped by the house with the next month's mortgage check, another envelope representing nearly half my income, scraped together through endless late nights and overwork. Mom was in the kitchen, flipping through bridal magazines Rachel had left behind. She was muttering to herself, circling venues and making notes in the margins about floral arrangements. She barely glanced at me as I set the envelope on the counter. "Beverly found the most exquisite venue," she announced without looking up. "The Riverside Country Club has an opening for next spring. She's putting down the deposit tomorrow. The ballroom overlooks the river and it can host 300 guests. It's exactly what she deserves for her big day." I did the math in my head. The venue alone cost more than everything I had contributed to keeping the household afloat over the last 4 months combined. Rachel could spend freely on luxury, while my sacrifices went unspoken, unseen. The imbalance was nauseating. And then she turned on me. Her eyes flicked up, scanning my face, my clothes, my posture. "You know, Lauren, you really should take better care of yourself. Look at Rachel, she's always polished, always prepared, even on her casual days. And this freelance thing," she sighed as though the words themselves were a burden. "It's been years and you're still struggling financially. Maybe it's time to admit some people are meant for traditional paths. Stability, structure. Rachel figured that out early. You should too." Her words landed like strikes from a baton. Each one a reminder of how deeply she misunderstood me. The sacrifices I had made, the endless hours, the drained accounts, were not evidence of failure. They were proof of my loyalty, of my commitment. Yet she couldn't see it. In her mind, Rachel's luxury was justified, while my devotion was weakness. Then came the final blow. She looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and frustration, her lips tightening as she spoke. "I just don't understand why you can't be more like your sister. Rachel has it all figured out, her career, her relationship, her future. You'll never be as good as she is, Lauren. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can learn to be content with less." Her words froze the air in the room. I had suspected all my life that this was how she truly felt, but hearing it spoken aloud so casually, so cruelly, it crushed something inside me. For a moment I felt the familiar shame rising. But then something unexpected surfaced instead. Clarity. For the first time I saw the situation with perfect precision. I wasn't the failure here. I was the daughter who had stepped up when it mattered most. I was the one keeping the roof over their heads while Rachel played princess with her diamond ring and luxury venues. And before I could stop myself, the words left my mouth, steady and sharp. "Then ask her to pay your bills." Mom blinked, stunned as though she hadn't heard correctly. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," I said, my voice even, almost frighteningly calm. "Ask your perfect daughter to cover your mortgage. Ask her to pay Dad's hospital bills. Ask her to handle the utilities, the car payments and every other expense I've been covering for the last 4 months." The color drained from her face. For the first time, reality pierced her carefully constructed illusion. The daughter she held on a pedestal had been absent through the worst of their crisis, while the one she belittled had been holding the line. The bridal magazine slipped from her hands. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her worldview was crumbling in real time. I didn't realize," she stammered weakly. "Didn't realize what?" I pressed. My voice stayed calm, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every sacrifice dismissed. That while Rachel was picking out flowers and planning vacations, I was working 16-hour days to keep you from losing your house. That while you were bragging about her corner office, I was emptying my savings to cover Dad's prescriptions. For the first time, Mom had no retort. No comparison. No lecture. Just silence, and the weight of truth pressing down on her like a burden she had never wanted to face. I didn't just speak my truth that night. I laid out evidence like a commander presenting an after-action report. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through payment records, holding the screen toward her as if it were undeniable proof in a tribunal. March mortgage. Me. April utilities. Me. Dad's prescription meds. Me. The catering for Rachel's engagement gala. Also me. Each line item was another strike, and with every swipe I watched the color drain from her face. She whispered, almost trembling, "Why didn't you tell me?" But we both knew she wasn't really asking. She hadn't wanted to know. Admitting the truth would have meant dismantling the hierarchy she had built between her daughters. "I did tell you, Mom," I answered. My tone was calm but carried years of suppressed anger finally sharpening into clarity. "Every time I handed you a check, every time I mentioned late nights, every time I said I was keeping the bills paid, you just chose not to hear it. Because it didn't fit the story you'd already decided on. The successful daughter and the struggling one. That's the narrative you protect." The words didn't just tumble out, they poured like a floodgate breaking open. For years I had swallowed resentment, but now it all came crashing forward. I told her about the comparisons that had worn me down like sandpaper on steel, the dismissive comments that made every accomplishment feel like a joke, the endless invisibility of my sacrifices. "Do you know what it's like," I asked, "to exhaust yourself for people who act like your effort doesn't exist? To empty your bank account to cover their survival while they treat you like a failure?" Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't stop. My voice was steady, each word forged in years of endurance. "And Rachel doesn't even know about Dad's situation, does she? Because you were too proud to ask your golden child for help. But you had no problem cashing checks from the daughter you thought wasn't good enough." That was the most damning revelation of all. That Mom had shielded Rachel from the truth while leaning on me like a crutch. She had built a hierarchy so rigid she would rather accept help from the daughter she looked down on than risk tarnishing the shine of the one she idolized. "She would have stepped up if she'd known," Mom insisted weakly. Even she didn't sound convinced. "Would she?" I shot back. "Or would she have been too busy with her prestigious cases and European vacations? You'll never know because you never even gave her the chance. You were so determined to protect her image that you let me bleed out financially instead." The argument spiraled on for an hour. She bounced between defensive explanations and tearful apologies, claiming she only ever wanted the best for both of us. But her excuses collapsed when weighed against reality. She couldn't deny what had happened. In the family's darkest hours, the so-called lesser daughter had carried the weight alone. I drew the line clearly that night. "I don't regret helping Dad," I told her, "but I won't be dismissed anymore. I won't be treated as invisible while being the one who held this family together. I'm not asking you to love me more than Rachel. I'm asking you to see me for who I am. To acknowledge what I've actually done, not what you think I've failed to do." For the first time in my life she saw me. Not as Rachel's shadow, not as a weaker reflection, but as a soldier who had taken up responsibility when no one else would. The dynamic between us shifted like tectonic plates under pressure. The kitchen confrontation ended with her promising something I never thought I'd hear, that she would call Rachel and finally tell her everything, including the truth about my role in keeping them afloat. The aftermath was more dramatic than I had ever anticipated. Mom did call Rachel, and the conversation lasted more than 2 hours. She explained Dad's medical situation, the bills piling up, and the months of financial support I had been providing. When Rachel called me the next day, her voice was quiet, stripped of the usual confidence I associated with her. "Lauren," she said, "I didn't know. I swear I had no idea. Mom never said a word about the money. I assumed Dad's insurance had it covered. I can't believe you've been carrying all of this alone." There was genuine guilt in her tone, and for the first time in years we had a real conversation. Sister to sister, not competitor to competitor. "I would have helped in a second if I'd known," she continued. "I feel sick knowing I was off planning getaways and parties while you were working yourself raw just to keep them housed. That's not the person I want to be. And just like that, Rachel shifted. She immediately offered to take over the heavy financial burdens, Dad's medical bills, the mortgage, even creating a proper emergency fund for the future. More importantly, she acknowledged something she had never understood before: the damage our mother's favoritism had done. "I never realized how much pressure you were under," she admitted. "I thought Mom's praise was just normal pride, but hearing the way she's spoken to you, it's wrong. You've been the strong one all along. And I didn't see it." From that moment, our relationship began healing. Rachel started calling me regularly, not to brag about her achievements but to actually ask about my work. She referred clients to me when they needed engineering or design help. At family gatherings, she made a point of mentioning my accomplishments, ensuring I was finally recognized. Mom's transformation was slower, but equally significant. The initial shock of realizing her bias gave way to genuine attempts to change. She began asking about my projects by name, celebrating when I landed contracts, catching herself mid-sentence whenever she started to compare me to Rachel. Sometimes she slipped, but now she would stop, apologize, and correct herself. "I'm sorry, Lauren. That was the old me. Tell me more about this new system you're designing." The biggest change came in how she spoke publicly. When neighbors asked about her daughters, she no longer beamed only about Rachel's firm. Instead, she'd say, "Rachel is doing wonderfully in law, and Lauren has built a remarkable defense engineering business. I'm proud of both my daughters for different reasons." Hearing that in front of others was like a salve over years of wounds. As Rachel stepped up financially and Mom shifted her perspective, the family's stability improved dramatically. Dad's recovery went well. 6 months later, he was back at work part-time, with a plan to resume full duties soon. And without the crushing financial pressure, my own life finally began to flourish. My freelance contracts snowballed into bigger opportunities. Within months, I left my day job and devoted myself fully to my own company. That decision, once ridiculed as reckless, became the very thing that secured my independence. With renewed confidence, I pushed for ambitious projects, forging relationships with clients who respected me not just as an engineer but as a leader. My personal life also shifted. With the burden of constant criticism lifted, I felt free to build relationships without fear of disapproval. When I met Daniel, a schoolteacher who played guitar in his free time, I introduced him to my family without hesitation. To my surprise, Mom welcomed him warmly, focusing on his kindness rather than his paycheck. 6 months after that confrontation, we gathered for Thanksgiving dinner. The difference in atmosphere was staggering. Rachel and Andrew were there along with Daniel, and for once conversation flowed naturally. No subtle digs. No weighted comparisons. Just laughter, stories, and respect. Mom cooked dishes she knew each of us loved, even making my favorite dessert alongside Rachel's. It was a small thing, but to me it meant everything. When Uncle Harold asked about her daughters, Mom's response reflected her new perspective. "Rachel is thriving in law, and Lauren's design firm has really taken off. I'm proud of both of them." Simple words, but they carried the weight of decades. The evening ended with board games and laughter, the competitiveness playful instead of poisoned. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged, like I wasn't just tolerated but valued. Later that night, as we cleaned up, Mom pulled me aside. Her voice cracked as she said, "Lauren, I'm sorry for all the years I made you feel less than Rachel. You saved this family not just with money but with strength. You've taught me to be better." Her apology wasn't vague. It was specific. She named the moments that had hurt, from dismissing my achievements to ignoring my sacrifices. And for once I believed her. Looking back now, I realized that night in the kitchen had been the turning point of my life. It was terrifying to finally speak my truth to the woman who had shaped my self-image for decades. But it was also liberating. That was the moment I stopped waiting for approval and started approving of myself. Sometimes the most important battle isn't fought overseas or in uniform. It's fought in your own home, against the voice that tells you you'll never be enough. And sometimes the victory comes the moment you say aloud, "I am enough." I always was. So I'll ask you, have you ever reached that moment? The one where you finally stood tall after years of being diminished? If this story resonates with you, drop your own experience in the comments. And if you found strength in my journey, please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and courage. Because in the end, the battlefield that matters most is the one where you claim your own worth.